close your eyes and let your mind drift as we journey through the world of Pokémon, from the hidden origins of its creation to the tiny details that shaped a generation. These gentle facts will guide you into a peaceful sleep. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the adventure carry you into dreams. The Genesis. When you think of Pokémon, you might picture the vibrant world of creatures and trainers, but the true beginning traces back to one man's childhood in a place that no longer exists. Satoshi Tajiri grew up in Machida, Tokyo, during a time when the area was still rural and untouched by the concrete sprawl that would eventually consume it. As a young boy, Tajiri spent countless hours exploring fields and streams, searching for insects. He wasn't just collecting them casually. He was obsessed, methodical, studying each creature with the intensity that would later define his work. His friends called him Dr. Bug because of his encyclopedic knowledge of every species he encountered. But as the years passed, urbanization crept across his childhood playground. The fields became parking lots, the streams were filled in, and the insects disappeared. This loss left a mark on young Tajiri, planting a seed that would eventually bloom into something far larger than anyone could have imagined. He wanted to capture that feeling of discovery, that thrill of finding something rare and sharing it with friends, and preserve it forever in a form that couldn't be paved over or forgotten. In 1983, Tajiri founded Game Freak, though it began not as a game development company, but as a simple fanzine. Back then, there were no websites or forums where gaming enthusiasts could share strategies and tips. Arcade games dominated the landscape, and information about how to beat them was precious. Tajiri hand-wrote his magazine, photocopied it, and sold it in specialist bookstores for just 200 yen. The circulation was tiny, reaching maybe a few dozen people at most, but it created a small community of passionate gamers. Among those readers was a young artist named Ken Sugimori. When Sugimori saw the magazine, he was immediately drawn to it, not just for the gaming strategies, but for the enthusiasm that radiated from every page. He sought out Tajiri, and the two became fast friends, spending hours discussing games, what made them compelling, and what they would do differently if given the chance. Sugimori eventually became the main illustrator for Game Freak, adding visual flair to Tajiri's written analyses. As the magazine grew, so did their frustration. They played countless arcade games, and while many were fun, few felt truly polished or innovative. The same patterns repeated endlessly: shoot enemies, avoid obstacles, rack up points. Tajiri and Sugimori would sit together after gaming sessions, picking apart what worked and what didn't, imagining how they might create something different. Eventually, they decided to stop just writing about games and start making them. The transition from magazine publishers to game developers was neither quick nor easy. They taught themselves programming through trial and error, studying existing games to understand how they worked. first real success came with a puzzle game called Quinty, which caught Nintendo's attention. It wasn't a blockbuster, but it was competent enough that Nintendo took notice of these young developers who clearly had potential. Through this connection, Tajiri met Shigeru Miyamoto, the legendary creator of Mario and Zelda. Miyamoto saw something in Tajiri's earnest passion and took him under his wing, offering guidance and access to Nintendo's resources. This mentorship would prove invaluable, giving Game Freak opportunities to work on projects for established franchises like Yoshi and Mario and Wario. But all the while, something else was percolating in Tajiri's mind, an idea that had been forming since his childhood days, chasing insects through the fields. The spark that would become Pokémon struck when Tajiri saw the Game Boy. More specifically, he noticed the link cable. This simple accessory, meant primarily for competitive games like Tetris, fascinated him. He envisioned something different. What if instead of competition, the cable enabled cooperation? What if players could exchange things, share discoveries, build collections together? The image that formed in his mind was of creatures traveling through that cable, moving from one person's world to another's, creating connections between players. In 1990, Tajiri put together a pitch document that would change gaming history. He called the project Capsule Monsters, drawing inspiration from the gashapon machines popular throughout Japan. You'd insert coins, turn a crank, and a plastic capsule would tumble out, containing a small toy figure. The excitement of not knowing exactly what you'd get, the desire to collect them all, the trading that occurred when friends got duplicates, all of these elements perfectly captured what Tajiri wanted to create in digital form. The pitch showed a world where creatures could be collected, stored in capsules, and connected via the Game Boy's link cable. In the early 1990s, portable gaming meant short, simple experiences. You'd play Tetris for a few minutes during your commute, then put it away. The idea of a deep, interconnected adventure that encouraged social interaction was revolutionary. Nintendo, impressed by both the concept and Game Freak's previous work, agreed to fund the project. Development began in 1990, and it would take 6 long, grueling years before the game saw release. The team was tiny, fewer than 10 people working on designs, and the technical limitations of the Game Boy proved more challenging than anyone anticipated. There were moments when Game Freak teetered on the edge of bankruptcy, when it seemed the project might collapse entirely. Staff members left, unable to sustain themselves on the meager pay. Tajiri himself reportedly went without a salary, surviving only through his parents' support. But the dream persisted, through sleepless nights and mounting debt, through technical hurdles that seemed insurmountable. The small team pressed forward. They were creating something that had never existed before, and that meant inventing solutions to problems no one had encountered. Every aspect of the game required careful consideration and creative compromise, balancing ambition against confronts the harsh reality of what a small cartridge with limited memory could actually contain, creating the first 151. The first Pokémon ever designed wasn't Pikachu, Charizard, or even one of the iconic starters. It was Rhydon, a bulky, rhinoceros-like creature that might seem like an odd choice for the inaugural member of a franchise built on capturing imaginations, but Rhydon served a crucial purpose. In those early days, it was the test subject, the creature used to figure out how movement would work, how battle animations would function, how stats would be calculated. Every system in the game was built around and tested through Rhydon. If you look carefully at the internal code of the original games, Rhydon appears at position 001 in the data, the very first entry. This is why statues of Rhydon appear in early gyms and Pokémon centers throughout Kanto. They weren't decorative choices made for lore reasons, but simply reused assets from the development process. The developers needed placeholder decorations and used what they had readily available. What began as a practical necessity became a hidden piece of history, visible to anyone who paid attention but understood by almost no one. Ken Sugimori led the design process with his small team, but the creative burden fell heavily on his shoulders. He was responsible for finalizing every design, drawing each creature from multiple angles to help the graphics department properly render them. The process was painstaking. Each Pokémon had to be drawn on graph paper first, mapped out square by square to ensure it would fit the pixel grid of the Game Boy's limited screen. This constraint meant designs had to be simple enough to be recognizable at tiny sizes while still conveying personality and distinctiveness. Originally, the team created over 200 different designs. The plan was to evaluate them all, keep the strongest, and save the others for potential sequels if the game proved successful. Some were immediately compelling creatures that seemed to design themselves, emerging fully formed with clear identities. Others were rougher, interesting concepts that didn't quite gel. The winnowing process took months, with endless discussions about which creatures felt essential and which could be cut without losing something important. Among the earliest designs was a small, balloon-like creature that would eventually become Clefairy. Its simple, round shape made it perfect for testing animations, and it appeared so frequently in early development builds that it became intimately associated with the project. In fact, Clefairy was seriously considered as the franchise's mascot before Pikachu ultimately claimed that role. The creature's friendly appearance and versatile design made it an ideal face for the brand, and an alternate timeline exists where Clefairy plushies sit on every child's shelf instead of Pikachu. Another important early designer was Atsuko Nishida, whose contributions shaped some of the most iconic species. She created Pikachu, giving it the round cheeks and tail that would become instantly recognizable around the world. She also designed Bulbasaur, Charmander, Squirtle, and many others that form the foundation of Kanto's ecosystem. Her style leaned toward the approachable, balancing out some of the more aggressive or unusual designs that other team members contributed. The name itself went through several transformations. Capsule Monsters was the original title, perfectly capturing the Gashapon inspiration, but it ran into trademark issues. Similar names and concepts already existed, and Game Freak found themselves unable to secure the necessary rights. They tried shortening it to Capumon, but that sounded awkward and didn't roll off the tongue. Eventually, they settled on Pocket Monsters, which could be shortened to Pokémon, a name that worked in both Japanese and English, though they didn't know yet how important that linguistic flexibility would become. Memory limitations haunted every decision. The Game Boy cartridge held less than 1 megabyte of data, a constraint that seems almost laughably small by modern standards, but was standard for the time, fitting 151 creatures, multiple towns, numerous battle systems, and everything else into that tiny space required constant creativity and compromise. Assets were recycled endlessly. Multiple Pokémon shared the same basic cry, just pitched slightly up or down to create variation. Town buildings reused the same tiles with different color palette. Sprites were designed to be as compact as possible while still being readable. The cries deserve special attention because they reveal just how resourceful the team had to be. Creatures like Rhydon, Gengar, and Kangaskhan all share variations of the same base sound file. The developers recorded a small library of basic noises, roars, chirps, buzzes, electronic warbles, and then manipulated them with pitch shifts and effects to create seemingly unique cries for each species. Most players never realized their favorite Pokémon's signature sound was actually just a modified version of another creature's cry. Kanto's towns carried a subtle theme that many players never consciously noticed. They were all named after colors. Pallet Town represented a blank canvas, the starting point where your journey would begin. Viridian City, Pewter City, Cerulean City, Lavender Town, Vermilion City, Celadon City, Fuchsia City, Saffron City, Cinnabar Island. Each name referenced a specific shade or hue. This gave the region a quiet unity, a sense that everything was part of a cohesive artistic vision, even if that vision was born partly from the need to quickly generate names that sounded good and were easy to remember. The decision to create 2 versions of the game Red and Green in Japan, later Red and Blue internationally, was both practical and philosophical. Practically, it justified the use of the link cable, giving players a concrete reason to connect with friends. Philosophically, it embodied the core theme of the game. Pokémon was about sharing, about cooperation, about bringing people together. You couldn't complete your Pokédex alone. You needed other people, needed to trade, needed to form relationships. In an increasingly isolated world, Tajiri was creating a game that forced connection. On February 27th, 1996, Pokémon Red and Green launched in Japan, there was little fanfare, minimal advertising. Nintendo didn't expect much. The Game Boy was aging hardware. And this quirky RPG about collecting monsters seemed more like a niche curiosity than a potential phenomenon. Initial sales were slow but steady, driven primarily by word of mouth. Kids started talking about it at school, showing each other the creatures they'd caught, trading during lunch breaks. The link cable, previously used mainly for competitive battles, became a social tool, a reason to seek out other players. Something unexpected was happening, something organic and unstoppable. The game was creating communities, forging friendships, becoming a shared language among children. By the time the enhanced blue version launched later in 1996, demand had grown significantly. Pokémon wasn't just a game anymore, it was becoming a cultural force. The revolutionary cable, the Game Boy link cable, existed long before Pokémon, but it had always been primarily a tool for competition. You'd connect two Game Boys to battle in Tetris, face off in racing games, compete head-to-head in sports titles. The cable facilitated confrontation, not cooperation. Players met across it as opponents, not partners. Tajiri's vision completely transformed this dynamic. Instead of fighting to win, you connected to share, to trade, to help each other complete collections. The cable became a bridge rather than a battlefield. This seemingly small philosophical shift had profound implications for how people related to the technology and to each other through it. The trading mechanic itself required careful design consideration. Which Pokémon should be exclusive to which version? How rare should certain species be? How do you create a sense of value and desirability without making the game frustrating for solo players? The team decided on a careful balance version exclusives that were roughly equivalent in strength, but different in type and appearance, encouraging trades based on personal preference and completionism rather than pure power. Some Pokémon, like Machoke and Haunter, required trading to reach their final evolution. This was an elegant way to ensure the link cable remained relevant throughout the entire game, not just for completing the Pokédex. A player might use Haunter for the entire adventure, bonding with it, only to discover they needed to trade it away temporarily to see it reach its full potential. This created a bittersweet tension, a moment of trust, where you had to let go of something precious, with faith it would return transformed. The animation of Pokémon moving through the cable became one of the most memorable visual moments of the games. You'd watch your creature dissolve into light, travel through the physical cord connecting the two Game Boys, and reconstitute on your friend's screen. It was simple, limited by the hardware's capabilities, but it sold the fantasy perfectly. Something was genuinely moving between devices, inhabiting your friend's world now instead of yours. Interestingly, the developers briefly considered adding a small chance of trades failing, as if the transfer didn't quite work and the Pokémon got lost somewhere in the cave. This would have added risk and made successful trades feel even more rewarding. The idea was quickly abandoned as too harsh. Losing a beloved Pokémon to a random chance would create frustration rather than excitement, but it shows how thoroughly they were thinking about ways to make the trading experience memorable and meaningful. When Pokémon Red and Blue launched in North America on September 28, 1998, nearly 2.5 years after the Japanese release, Nintendo executed a marketing campaign that emphasized the social aspect. Commercials showed kids connecting their Game Boys, trading in schoolyards, gathering in groups around the handheld screens. The tagline, "Gotta catch 'em all," wasn't just about the Pokémon themselves. It was about the social hunt, the collaborative effort to find them all together. The success in America surprised even Nintendo. They'd expected modest sales from what they assumed was a culturally specific phenomenon. But the core appeal, collecting, trading, battling, exploring, transcended cultural boundaries. Kids in suburban American schools formed trading circles, just like kids in Tokyo. The game created its own culture wherever it went, establishing rituals and social structures that felt organic despite being engineered into the game's design. The link cable became a symbol of connection that went beyond its physical function. It represented friendship, cooperation, shared experience. In retrospect, it foreshadowed the internet age, where trading and collecting would happen globally rather than face to face. But there was something special about the physicality of those early trades. The need to actually be present with another person. Game Boys, connected by that short cord. You couldn't trade with a stranger on the other side of the world. You had to find someone nearby, someone real, someone you could talk to and negotiate with. Kanto's hidden geography. The Kanto region wasn't just a fantasy map pulled from thin air. It was based on the real Kanto region of Japan, specifically the area around Tokyo and its surrounding prefectures. The developers took recognizable geographic features and compressed them, simplified them, turned them into game-friendly versions that maintained the essential character of the real location. Pallet Town, the player's starting point, corresponds to a small rural town on the outskirts of the urban sprawl. It's quiet, peaceful, a place where nothing much happens, the perfect origin for a hero's journey. Route 1 leading north represents the gradual transition from countryside to civilization, the slow increase in development you'd experience traveling toward a major city. Viridian City serves as the first real town, still relatively small, but showing signs of urbanization with its gym and Pokemart. Moving further north, through Viridian Forest itself, inspired by the dark, dense forests that exist in Japan's more rural areas, you emerge in Pewter City, a town built near mountains and known for its museum. This mirrors real Japanese towns that serve as gateways to mountainous regions. Cerulean City, with its emphasis on water and bridges, reflects the way rivers and waterways shape Japanese urban development. The city sits near water. Its gym specializes in water types, and you cross a bridge to continue your journey. All details that ground the fantasy location in recognizable reality. Lavender Town deserves special attention, both for its real-world inspiration and its lasting impact on players. The town is built around Pokémon Tower, a 7-story structure where deceased Pokémon are laid to rest. This was directly inspired by Japanese funeral customs and the reverence shown toward the dead. The eerie atmosphere, the ghost-type Pokémon, and especially the unsettling music combine to create one of the most memorable locations in gaming. The music particularly requires discussion. Composer Junichi Masuda used unusual musical scales rarely heard in video games, creating a melody that felt wrong in ways players couldn't quite articulate. It didn't follow the patterns their ears expected, creating subconscious discomfort. This spawned countless urban legends about the Lavender Town Syndrome, with players claiming the music made them sick or gave them nightmares. While these stories were exaggerated or fabricated, they demonstrate how effectively the sound design achieved its goal of creating an unsettling atmosphere. Saffron City, centrally located and massive in scale, serves as Kanto's equivalent to Tokyo, the hub, the economic center, the place where everything connects. Large, you can't walk around it all initially. You need to find alternate routes and only gradually access different sections. This mirrors the overwhelming scale of Tokyo itself, how newcomers can feel lost in its vast expanse. Cycling Road, connecting Celadon City to Fuchsia City, was inspired by real coastal biking routes in Japan. The developers wanted to include a location where the bicycle felt necessary and exciting, where you could enjoy the sensation of speeding past beautiful scenery, the shaped path, the carefully placed trainers, the view of the water below. All of these elements combined to make Cycling Road feel less like a route and more like an experience. Seafoam Islands drew inspiration from natural sea caves formed by volcanic activity, places where water has carved passages through ancient lava rock. The puzzles involving strength boulders and water currents, the maze-like layout, the Articuno wading deep within these transformed and natural phenomenon in game-worthy content that rewarded exploration and problem-solving. Cinnabar Island, with its volcano and laboratory, represented the intersection of natural power and human ambition. The mansion, filled with journals documenting genetic experiments, told a dark story about the lengths scientists would go to create the ultimate Pokémon. This wasn't explicit. The player had to piece together the narrative from scattered documents, but it added depth and maturity to what seemed on the surface like a simple game about catching cute creatures. The infamous truck near the SS Anne spawned one of gaming's most enduring myths. It was just a decorative sprite, scenery to fill empty space, but its placement in a difficult-to-reach area made players certain it must hide something important. Rumors spread across schoolyards that Mew, the mythical 151st Pokémon, could be found under the truck. The rumor was false, but it persisted for years, passed from friend to friend, growing more elaborate with each retelling. Some claimed you needed to use strength on the truck. Others said you needed to return at a specific time of day. Still others insisted you needed to complete some complex sequence of events that barely made sense. The myth's persistence reveals something important about how players engaged with the game. They believed there were secrets waiting to be discovered because the world felt rich enough to hide them. The developers had created an environment that rewarded exploration and experimentation, so players kept exploring and experimenting, certain that if they just tried the right combination, they'd unlock something incredible. MissingNo, the famous glitch Pokémon, emerged from the map's technical structure. Kanto wasn't designed as individual areas that loaded separately. It was one continuous space that scrolled seamlessly as you moved. This created an illusion of a real, connected world, but it also meant that stepping slightly outside the intended boundaries could load unfinished sections of data. The old man's catching tutorial temporarily stored your name in a memory location normally used for wild Pokémon data. Flying to Cinnabar Island and surfing along the eastern coast would attempt to load encounters from that data, resulting in corrupted creatures that shouldn't exist. Most players encountered MissingNo by accident, following whispered instructions from friends who'd heard it from other friends. The glitch became famous because it was reproducible, accessible, and had interesting effects, particularly the item duplication that resulted from encountering it. What was essentially a programming oversight transformed into one of gaming's most iconic moments. Proof that sometimes the most memorable parts of a game are the ones that weren't intentionally designed. Battle system secrets. The battle mechanics in the original Pokémon games operated on rules that weren't always intuitive or consistent, creating quirks that shaped the competitive scene for years. Critical hits provide one of the most notable examples. Instead of being a flat percentage chance applied to every attack, critical hit rate was determined by the user's speed stat. Faster Pokémon like Jolteon or Persian had dramatically higher chances of landing critical hits compared to slower species like Snorlax or Golem. This meant that speed wasn't just about attacking first, it was about dealing bonus damage more frequently. Fast Pokémon became even more dangerous than their base stats suggested, while slow Pokémon found themselves at a compounding disadvantage. The mechanic particularly affected moves like Slash and Razor Leaf, which had elevated critical hit rates. A fast Pokémon using Slash could critical hit nearly every turn, turning battles into one-sided affairs. Move accuracy created another layer of hidden complexity. While moves displayed their accuracy as percentages, Thunder at 70%, Blizzard at 90%, the internal calculations didn't always work exactly as players expected. The formula involved multiplying the move's accuracy by the ratio of the user's accuracy stage to the target's evasion stage, but implementation quirks meant some moves behaved strangely. Thunder seemed to miss far more than 30% of the time, Others hit more reliably than their numbers suggested. Swift, the star-shaped projectile attack, was notable for having perfect accuracy. It never missed under any circumstances. This made it invaluable despite its modest power, particularly against opponents who boosted their evasion with moves like Double Team or Minimize. Having even one reliable attack in your moveset could win battles that would otherwise be unwinnable. The self-destruct and explosion moves were programmed with a unique quirk that made them devastatingly powerful. Instead of just having high base power, they doubled the user's attack stat before calculating damage. This meant a Pokémon using Explosion was effectively hitting with twice its normal strength, on top of the move's already massive base power of 250. Electrode became infamous for this tactic, switching it in, using Explosion, and eliminating even the bulkiest opponents at the cost of Electrode itself. It was high-risk, high-reward gameplay that created memorable moments where a single turn could swing an entire battle. The struggle move existed as a fail-safe to prevent softlocks. If a Pokémon ran out of usable moves, all attacks exhausted their PP or became disabled, struggle would activate automatic. It dealt typeless damage with recoil, ensuring battles could always progress even in the strangest circumstances. The developers never expected players to see it often, but long battles occasionally brought it into play, and its appearance always felt significant, like the game itself was ensuring fairness even in edge cases. Metronome provided a different kind of chaos. This move, associated primarily with Clefairy and Clefable, randomly selected and executed any other move in the game. It was programmed as a test for animations because it needed to be able to call on every attack's animation. The randomness made it useless for competitive play but entertaining for casual battles, where a weak Clefairy might suddenly unleash Aeroblast or Hydro Pump attacks it should never naturally learn. The 4-move limit wasn't a design choice driven by strategy. It was a technical necessity. Allowing unlimited moves would have required more memory than the cartridge could spare, but this limitation became a defining strategic element of the series. Players had to make difficult choices about move coverage versus utility, offensive power versus defensive options. Every decision mattered, creating depth from constraint. Effort values, or EVs, operated invisibly in the background, unknown to most players for years. Every Pokémon defeated provided specific hidden points that accumulated toward stat growth. A Pokémon that battled many Zubats would develop more speed than one that battled Machops, which would gain attack instead. This created individuality even among identical species and levels. 2 Charizards, even with identical natures and stats otherwise, could perform differently based on their training history. Individual values, or IVs, added another layer of uniqueness. These were determined when a Pokémon was encountered and represented genetic variation within a species. The values ranged from 0 to 15 in the original games, affecting every stat This meant wild Pokémon, even of the same species found in the same location, could vary significantly in quality. Competitive players eventually learned to check these values through complex calculations, but casual players simply accepted that some catches were better than others without understanding why. The distinction between physical and special moves was determined by type rather than the move itself. Until the 4th generation, all fire, water, grass, electric, psychic, ice, dark, and dragon moves were special, regardless of whether they involved direct contact. All normal, fighting, ground, rock, flying, bug, ghost, poison, and steel moves were physical. This created strange situations where Pokémon couldn't effectively use their own stats. Gengar had high attack, but all ghost moves were special, while Flareon had high attack, but all fire moves were special. The status conditions, poison, burn, paralysis, sleep, and freeze, each carried strategic weight beyond their immediate effects. Burn halved attack, making physical attackers far less threatening. Paralysis reduced speed by 75% and had a chance of preventing action entirely. Sleep forced the target to waste turn. Freeze had no turn limit and no natural recovery, making it potentially game-ending. The variety of conditions meant choosing what status move to use required understanding the matchup and predicting your opponent's strategy. Johto's legacy. 3 years passed between Pokémon Red and Green's Japanese release and the arrival of Gold and Silver. In the game's fiction, 3 years had also passed since the events in Kanto, creating a real-time connection between release dates and story progression. This parallel made the sequel feel less like just another game, and more like a return to a world that had continued existing in your absence, changing and evolving while you were away. Johto, as a region, was inspired by Japan's Kansai area, known for its historical significance, traditional architecture, and cultural preservation, where Kanto represented modernity and urban development. Johto embodied tradition and rural beauty. The region's towns featured old temples, traditional houses, and a slower pace of life that contrasted sharply with Kanto's bustle. This wasn't accidental. The developers wanted players to feel the shift, to sense they were exploring somewhere with deeper roots and longer history. 100 new Pokémon populated Johto, bringing the total count to 251. The new creatures were designed with explicit connections to Generation 1 species. Some, like Crobat, Kingdra, and Steelix, were new evolutions for existing Pokémon. Others, like Pichu, Cleffa, and Igglybuff, were baby forms that required breeding to obtain. This interconnection between generations made the Pokémon world feel more cohesive, suggesting these creatures had always existed, but were only now being discovered. The real-time clock system represented a massive technical achievement for the Game Boy Color. The cartridge contained an internal battery that kept time even when the system was off. This allowed the game to track actual hours and days, making certain events time-dependent. Some Pokémon only appeared at night. The bug-catching contest happened on specific weekdays. Evolution for Espeon and Umbreon required specific times of day combined with high friendship. Berries grew on trees in real time, harvestable once daily. This feature transformed how players engaged with the game. You couldn't just play through in a marathon session, you had to return daily, checking what had changed, harvesting berries, seeing which Pokémon were available at that hour. The game inserted itself into your routine, becoming a daily ritual rather than a one-time adventure. Some players set alarms to wake up at specific times to catch nocturnal Pokémon, a dedication that speaks to how effectively the mechanic enhanced immersion. The breeding system introduced unprecedented depth by leaving two compatible Pokémon at the daycare. Players could eventually receive an egg that would hatch into a baby form of the mother's species. This opened doors for move inheritance eggs could know moves the baby couldn't normally learn through leveling, creating unique combinations. Breeding also allowed for stat optimization. Once players understood IVs could be influenced through parent selection, baby Pokémon served multiple purposes in the game's design. Obviously, they were cute, expanding Pokémon's appeal to younger children and girls who might find creatures like Pikachu or Togepi more accessible than Machamp or Steelix. But they also solved a design problem. How do you introduce new forms for iconic species without just making them bigger and stronger? Baby forms provided evolution depth without power creep, allowing players to experience familiar Pokémon in new ways. The introduction of Dark and Steel types addressed long-standing balance issues from the first generation. Psychic types had been overpowered in Red and Blue, with few reliable counters and resistance to most common attack types. Dark types were specifically designed as psychic checks, immune to psychic attacks, and dealing super effective damage in return. Steel types added defensive utility, resistant to an incredible number of types, but balanced by weaknesses to fire, fighting, and ground. The splitting of the special stat into special attack and special defense had profound implications for strategy. In Generation 1, a single special stat controlled both offensive and defensive special capabilities, meaning Pokémon like Alakazam were simultaneously devastating attackers and solid tanks against special moves. The split allowed for more specialized design. Blissey could have massive special defense but weak special attack, while Gengar could have high special attack but poor special defense. Shiny Pokémon represented one of Gold and Silver's most exciting additions, even though most players never encountered one through random chance. With odds of 1 in 8,192, finding a wild shiny required tremendous luck. To ensure everyone experienced the feature, the developers placed a guaranteed encounter at the Lake of Rage, a red Gyarados that served as a plot point. This Crimson Serpent became one of the generation's most iconic moments. A gift to every player, showing them that Pokémon could exist in alternate color. The Pokégear served as Johto's answer to modern technology, a multifunctional device that included a map, radio, phone, and clock. The radio particularly captured players' imaginations, featuring multiple stations that broadcast different content on different days. Some stations helped locate rare Pokémon. Others provided passwords for mysterious items. The attention to this detail, creating what felt like a living radio culture within the game, showed how thoroughly the developers wanted Johto to feel like a real place with its own media and communication networks. Johto's gym leaders reflected types not covered by Kanto's roster: flying, bug, normal, ghost, fighting, steel, ice, and dragon. The selection ensured players experienced new challenges and needed to build more diverse teams. Particularly notable was Claire, the dragon-type leader, and Lance's cousin, whose team tested players' preparation for the Elite Four. Her Kingdra, with its unique water dragon typing, had almost no weaknesses and forced creative problem-solving. The Elite Four underwent a complete overhaul, with only Bruno returning from the Kanto roster. Will, specialized in psychic types. Koga, formerly Fuchsia City's gym leader, brought poison. Bruno continued with fighting, and Karen introduced dark types to the highest levels of competition. Lance returned as champion, now featuring even stronger dragon types and showing clear growth in the 3 years since Red defeated him. The ability to return to Kanto after becoming Johto's champion created unprecedented scope. Suddenly the game doubled in size, offering 8 more gyms to challenge and an entire region to re-explore. But Kanto had changed. New gym leaders had taken over in some cities. Others had relocated, and areas like Cinnabar Island had been devastated by volcanic eruption. The region felt both familiar and different, showing that time's passage affected the game world, just as it affected the real world. The ultimate challenge waited atop Mount Silver Red, the silent protagonist of the first games, now serving as the strongest trainer in the series. The battle carried immense weight for anyone who'd played the originals. You were fighting yourself, or rather, fighting the hero you'd once been. Red's team featured the 3 Kanto starters fully evolved, along with Pikachu, Espeon, and Snorlax. His Pokémon were level 80 or higher, far stronger than anything else in the game. Defeating him felt like graduating from one era and entering another. Legendary creatures. Legendary Pokémon occupied a unique space in the early games. Rare creatures, steeped in mythology and power, often requiring specific conditions or locations to encounter. The original trio, Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres, established the template that future generations would follow. 3 related creatures, embodying different elemental forces, hidden in remote locations, stationary and waiting for prepared trainers to challenge them. Articuno, the ice bird, nested deep within the Seafoam Islands. Finding it required solving boulder puzzles and navigating complex cave systems, making the eventual encounter feel earned rather than given. Zapdos resided in the abandoned power plant, its electric energy somehow sustaining the facility's dormant machinery. Moltres waited at the summit of Victory Road, a final test before the Elite Four. Each placement made thematic sense, while also encouraging exploration of optional areas players might otherwise skip. Mewtwo represented something different from the legendary birds. Not a force of nature, but a creation of human ambition gone wrong. The journals scattered throughout Cinnabar Mansion told its story in fragments. Scientists attempting to clone the mythical Mew, succeeding in creating life, but failing to anticipate the consequences. Mewtwo, awakening in a laboratory with immense power but no understanding of its purpose, destroyed the facility and everyone in it before retreating to Cerulean Cave. The anime's first movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back, released in July 1998 in Japan, expanded this story into a meditation on identity, purpose, and the relationship between originals and copies. Schools reported noticeably lower attendance on opening day. Children skipped class to see it in theaters, where they also received exclusive trading cards. The movie tackled surprisingly mature themes for a children's franchise, with Mewtwo questioning its right to exist and ultimately learning that the circumstances of one's birth matter less than what one does with life. The theatrical experience of watching Mewtwo and Mew battle on the big screen left an indelible mark on an entire generation. For many fans, it was the moment Pokémon transcended being just a game and became something emotionally resonant, a story with real weight and meaning. Mew itself existed in an interesting space between official release and underground legend. It was programmed into the games but not obtainable through normal play, meant to be distributed through special events. However, rumors spread about glitches that could make Mew appear, and some of these rumors were actually true. Complex sequences of actions could manipulate the game's memory to spawn Mew on Route 8 or Route 25. These glitches were never intended, but they gave dedicated players a way to add the mythical Pokémon to their team without attending events. Johto's legendary creatures introduced new concepts to the formula. Ho-Oh and Lugia, the box legendaries for Gold and Silver, represented not just power, but also deep mythology tied directly to the region's history. The Burned Tower in Ecruteak City served as a physical reminder of past tragedy, a massive structure that once stood alongside the Tin Tower, home to both legendary birds, until a mysterious fire destroyed it 150 years before the game's events. When the burned tower collapsed, 3 unknown Pokémon perished in the flames. Ho-Oh, guardian of the skies, descended and revived them with its power. But the creatures that emerged were different from what they'd been before. They became Raikou Entei, and Suicune, the legendary beasts embodying thunder, fire, and the north wind. This creation myth tied the legendaries to specific locations and events, giving them narrative weight beyond simply being powerful creatures to catch. The legendary beasts introduced roaming mechanics to the series, unlike previous legendaries that waited in fixed locations. These three wandered Johto, changing routes randomly every time the player entered a new area. Tracking them required checking the Pokédex's area function after encountering them once, then planning routes to intercept them. They would always flee on the first turn, making capture extremely difficult. Players needed to use Mean Look or Arena Trap to prevent escape, then whittle down HP and inflict status effects before the beasts broke free. This cat and mouse game created a different kind of legendary hunt, one focused on persistence and strategy rather than simply finding the right location. The beasts felt alive in a way static legendaries didn't. They were creatures with their own agency, moving through the world independently of the player's action. The Lake of Rage's red Gyarados served a dual purpose in the game. On one level, it was a guaranteed shiny encounter, ensuring every player experienced this rare variation. On another level, it connected to the plot involving Team Rocket's radio tower takeover. The Gyarados had been forcibly evolved through experimental broadcasts, its unusual coloration a side effect of the process. After catching or defeating it, players obtained a red scale that would later be exchanged for the HM Whirlpool, making this legendary encounter directly relevant to game progression. Celebi, the time-traveling Pokémon, existed only through special events in Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Its Pokédex number of 251 gave it a sense of finality, the absolute completion of the second generation. Obtaining it required attending Nintendo promotional events or using special connectivity features, making it genuinely rare in a way few other Pokémon could claim. The anime phenomenon. The Pokémon anime premiered on April 1st, 1997. Less than a year after the games launched in Japan, it took the basic premise, a young trainer beginning his journey, catching Pokémon in battling gyms, and expanded it into a weekly adventure series, Ash Ketchum. The protagonist was an optimistic, hot-headed 10-year-old who overslept on his journey's starting day, arriving late to Professor Oak's laboratory to find all three traditional starters already claimed. He received, instead, a Pikachu, an electric mouse that wanted nothing to do with him. The rocky start to their relationship became the emotional core of the series. Pikachu shocked Ash repeatedly, refused to enter its Pokeball, and generally made life difficult. But when a flock of wild Spearow attacked, Ash threw himself between them and Pikachu, protecting the small creature with his own body. This moment of selfless courage earned Pikachu's trust and loyalty, cementing their partnership for the hundreds of episodes that would follow. Ikue Ōtani, the voice actress who brought Pikachu to life, deserves special recognition for creating one of the most recognizable voices in entertainment. She didn't speak words. Instead, she expressed every emotion through variations of Pika and Chu, somehow conveying joy, anger, sadness, determination, and affection through just those 2 syllables. The production team originally planned for Pikachu to eventually learn human speech, but after seeing Tani's performance, they abandoned that idea, realizing that keeping Pikachu's communication limited made audiences work to understand it, creating deeper engagement. Ōtani's voice was used globally, one of the few elements not localized when the anime spread internationally. Whether you watched in Japan, America, France, or anywhere else, Pikachu sounded the same. This created a universal recognition factor. That particular squeaky cry transcended language barriers, instantly identifiable, regardless of where you heard it. The anime took creative liberties that enhanced rather than contradicted the games. Gym leaders, who appeared as simple NPC battles in the games, received full backstories and personality. Misty became a traveling companion with a fear of bug types and dreams of being a water master. Brock, the rock-solid gym leader, showed a softer side, passionate about Pokémon breeding and comically infatuated with every woman he met. These characterizations gave depth what were essentially boss battles in the games. Team Rocket's Jesse, James, and Meowth transformed from generic villains into beloved characters. In the games, Team Rocket served as antagonists you battled and defeated on your way to more important challenges. In the anime, this trio became recurring comedy relief, chasing Ash and Pikachu endlessly despite never succeeding, blasting off after every failed scheme. Their persistence in the face of constant failure made them strangely endearing. Meowth's ability to speak human language gave him a tragic backstory. He'd learned to walk upright and speak in a desperate attempt to impress a female Meowth, only to be rejected for abandoning his species' natural behavior. This depth surprised audiences expecting simple villain characters, adding emotional complexity to what could have been one-dimensional antagonists. The anime often previewed Pokémon before they appeared in games released outside Japan. The very first episode featured Ho-Oh flying across the sky, years before Gold and Silver's international release. Togepi became a main character when Misty's egg hatched, introducing viewers worldwide to a second-generation Pokémon they couldn't yet obtain. These previews built anticipation and mystery, making the eventual release of new games feel like finally accessing something you'd only glimpsed before. The movies became annual events, each one featuring rare or legendary Pokémon and typically tackling deeper themes than the episodic series. Pokémon 2000 explored environmental balance and the responsibility humans bear toward nature. Pokémon 3 dealt with grief and the danger of losing oneself in fantasy. Pokémon 4 ever examined the relationship between past and future, and how the consequences of our actions echo through time. These weren't simple adventure stories. They were using the Pokémon framework to explore ideas that resonated with audiences of all ages. The localization process for the English dub involved more than just translation. Cultural references were changed, visual puns were redrawn or removed, and dialogue was sometimes completely rewritten to better suit Western audiences. Some episodes were never dubbed at all, either because they contained content deemed inappropriate, or because they relied too heavily on Japanese cultural knowledge. This created interesting differences between regions. Fans who watched the original Japanese version with subtitles saw a slightly different show than English viewers, with different jokes, different emotional beats, and sometimes different plot points. The anime's influence on the games cannot be overstated. Pikachu's popularity in the anime directly led to Pokémon Yellow, a special edition where Pikachu followed the player character around the overworld, refusing to enter its Pokéball just like in the show. Jesse and James appeared as recurring villains. Yellow was essentially the anime in game form, a recognition that the two media had become inseparable in the public consciousness. Technical marvels, the technical achievements that made Pokémon possible, often go unrecognized because they're invisible when working correctly. The game had to track data for 151 different species, each with its own stats, moves, cry, sprite, and various other attributes. It needed to store the player's team of up to 6 Pokémon, plus up to 20 boxes of storage, plus data about which Pokémon had been seen and caught. It tracked moves, PP, status conditions, held items in later generations, and dozens of other variables per creature. All of this ran on hardware with less memory than a single modern tweak. The Game Boy contained 8 kilobytes of working memory and could address cartridges up to 1 megabyte in size. Though most games were smaller, Pokémon Red and Blue used every byte efficiently, compressing data, reusing assets, and employing clever programming tricks to fit everything that needed to fit. The sprite system exemplified this efficiency. Each Pokémon had 2 sprites, one for battle and one for the Pokédex. But these weren't stored as complete images. Instead, the game saved them as indexed color maps, where each pixel referenced a position in a shared color palette. This meant multiple sprites could share the same palette, drastically reducing storage requirements. The downside was that all Pokémon using the same palette had to use the same limited color scheme, which is why so many early Pokémon were green, purple, or brown. These colors worked well with the Game Boy's display. Sound design faced similar constraints. The Game Boy had 4 audio channels, 2 square wave channels for melodies, 1 programmable wave channel for bass or more complex sounds, and one noise channel for percussion and effects. Junichi Masuda composed the entire soundtrack within these limitations, creating memorable melodies that loop seamlessly because battles could last minutes. Each track had to be interesting enough to avoid becoming annoying through repetition, while simple enough to encode efficiently. Pokémon cries were particularly clever solutions to audio limitations. Recording or storing actual animal sounds was impossible. There simply wasn't room. Instead, the developers created a library of basic waveforms and manipulated them with pitch, speed, and effect changes. A single bass sound could become 5 or 10 different cries through clever editing, and most players never realized they were hearing variations on the same theme. The map structure deserves special attention because it enabled both the game's seamless feel and its famous glitches. Rather than treating each route and city as a separate area that loaded independently, Kanto existed as one large connected space. This allowed smooth scrolling transitions when moving between areas, making the world feel cohesive and real. But it also meant that accessing memory addresses outside the intended playable area would load whatever data happened to be stored there, resulting in glitch encounters and corrupted spaces. MissingNo, the most famous glitch, emerged from this structure. The Old Man's Catching tutorial temporarily stored the player's name in memory addresses normally used for wild encounter data. Under normal circumstances, entering a new area would overwrite these addresses with correct encounter tables, but Cinnabar Island's eastern coast was programmed not to have wild encounters. It was meant to be surfed past quickly on the way to the Seafoam Islands. When you surfed there, the game looked for encounter data, found your stored name instead, and tried to load Pokémon based on those character values. The result was corrupted sprite data that looked like scrambled pixels, often appearing as a backward L shape with a level of usually over 100. Catching MissingNo had side effects. It corrupted Hall of Fame data and caused graphical glitches, but it also duplicated the 6th item in your bag. This made it invaluable for obtaining infinite rare candies or Master Balls, turning a bug into one of the game's most famous features. Other glitches allowed even stranger possibilities. The Trainer Fly glitch, when executed correctly, could spawn any Pokémon in the game based on the special stat of the last creature you battled. This meant skilled players could obtain Mew, which was programmed into the game but not meant to be catchable. The glitch required precise timing flying away from a trainer battle at the exact moment they spotted you, then encountering specific wild Pokémon to set the right values. It was complex enough that most players couldn't execute it without guides, but it proved that Mew was in the game all along, waiting to be accessed through unintended means. The single save system, frustrating for families sharing a Game Boy, existed because of cartridge limitations. Saving required a battery to maintain memory when the system was off, and those batteries had limited capacity. Storing multiple save files would either require more expensive components or mean each save contained less data. Nintendo chose one robust save file over multiple limited ones, leading to countless sibling arguments over whose turn it was to play and how much progress could be deleted. Hidden details everywhere. The numbering system for the Pokédex seems logical when viewing the finished product creatures grouped roughly by evolution families and habitats, but it was actually determined by programming order. Whichever creatures were coded into the game first received lower internal index numbers, and these numbers became their Pokédex position. This is why Rhydon is internal number 1, despite being Pokédex number 112. It was the first Pokémon programmed into the system. This coding-based order explains why some evolution families are split across the Pokédex. Magneton appears at number 82, while Magnemite is at 51, because they were coded at different times during development. Pokémon that were considered late in development appear later in the Pokédex, regardless of where they might logically fit. It's a reminder that the game's clean, organized presentation emerged from messy, iterative development. Nurse Joy's consistency across every Pokémon Center emerged from player feedback during testing. Early builds featured different healing NPCs in each town, but playtesters found this disorienting. They'd enter a Pokémon Center expecting familiarity, and instead encountered someone new. The developers realized that the healing centers needed to feel safe, reliable, and unchanging. Having the same Nurse Joy everywhere, wearing the same uniform, greeting you with the same text, created that comfort. The anime later explained this as a large family of identical pink-haired nurses, but in the games, it was simply a design decision that made players feel welcome. The healing jingle itself became one of gaming's most recognizable sounds. That short melody plays every time your Pokémon are restored, and Junichi Masuda composed it specifically to evoke relief and satisfaction. The notes rise gently, resolve cleanly, and the whole thing lasts just a few seconds, long enough to register emotionally, but short enough not to slow gameplay. It's been retained with only minor variations through every generation since, because changing it would feel wrong. That jingle is the sound of safety, of being healed, of being ready for the next challenge. The mom character in Gold and Silver gained new depth through the saving system. When you lost battles in the first generation, you'd wake up at a Pokémon Center with half your money gone, lost as a penalty. It was frustrating, particularly for players struggling with difficult encounters. Gold and Silver kept the money loss, but added a twist. Some of the lost money went to Mom, who saved it, occasionally used it to buy useful items or decorations for your room. This small change made defeats less painful and gave Mom a presence throughout the journey. She wasn't just the parent who waved goodbye at the start. She was actively involved, managing your finances, supporting your adventure from home, finding new decorations in your room or items in your PC because Mom bought them, created moments of warmth reminders that you had someone who cared about your progress. The bicycle voucher in red and blue represented an interesting design philosophy. The bicycle cost 1 million Poké Dollars in stores, an amount impossible to accumulate, ensuring you couldn't buy it normally. Instead, you received a voucher as a gift for helping the chairman of the Pokémon fan club. This made the bicycle feel earned through kindness rather than purchased with money, reinforcing the game's themes about relationships and helping others. Splash. Famously, Magikarp's signature move emerged from a translation quirk. In Japanese, the move's name translates more closely to a hop or bounce, reflecting the fish's flopping movements. When localized, it became Splash, which suggested water-based activity. This caused confusion when Pokémon, like Hoppip, a flying seed creature with no connection to water, could learn the move. It made perfect sense in Japanese. Hoppip bounces around but seemed bizarre in English. The mistranslation stuck through every generation, becoming part of Pokemon's identity as the most useless move in the game. The game corner, with its slot machines and coin exchange, was directly modeled on Japan's pachinko parlors. Pachinko occupies a legal gray area in Japan. Technically, it's not gambling because you win tokens rather than money, and those tokens are then exchanged for prizes at separate locations. Pokemon replicated this structure, letting you place slots for coins that could then be exchanged for Pokemon or TMs. Western players familiar with casinos found it odd but functional. However, this feature gradually disappeared from the series. Various regions' laws regarding gambling in children's games meant the game corner faced increasing scrutiny. Some international versions removed the slot machines entirely or made them non-functional. By later generations, game corners either vanished or were replaced with different mini-games, ending a tradition that had lasted since the beginning. The Unknown, found in the ruins of Alph in Johto, represented one of the series' strangest design choices. 28 different forms existed, each resembling a letter of the alphabet, plus 2 resembling punctuation marks. They were incredibly weak in battle, with only one move, Hidden Power, which varies in type and strength based on the user's IVs. Catching all forms became a collection challenge separate from the main Pokédex, appealing to completionists willing to spend hours hunting through ruins. The ruins of Alph themselves told a subtle story through their puzzles and journal entries, suggesting an ancient civilization that worshipped or lived alongside Unknown. These letter-shaped Pokémon might have been used for writing or communication, their various forms composing an ancient language. The ruined slide puzzles depicted legendary Pokémon Ho-Oh, Omanite, Aerodactyl, Kabuto, hinting at history stretching back millions of years. This environmental storytelling added depth without requiring explicit narration, letting curious players piece together implications themselves. Pokérus, the Pokémon virus, remains one of the rarest and most beneficial conditions in the games. With odds of roughly 1 in 21,000, it's actually rarer than encountering a shiny Pokémon. When infected, a Pokémon gains double effort values from battles, allowing for faster stat optimization. The virus spreads to adjacent party members, but cures itself after a few days. Though cured Pokémon retain the benefits, most players never encountered Pokerus naturally, and those who did often didn't realize what had happened. The Pokémon Center nurse mentions that a Pokémon has recovered from Pokerus, but the game provides little explanation of what that means or what effects it had. Only through external guides did the community learn that Pokerus was actually beneficial, not harmful, and that cured Pokémon kept permanent EV bonuses. It was a secret hiding in plain sight, mentioned directly but never explained, waiting for curious players to investigate further. Closing thoughts. As you drift toward sleep, consider how these 150 facts weave together to form a complete picture of Pokémon's early history. From a boy catching insects in Tokyo fields to a global phenomenon spanning games, anime, cards, and movies. The journey reflects both careful design and fortunate accidents. The franchise succeeded because Satoshi Tajiri understood something fundamental people want to connect to, share experiences, to feel part of something larger than themselves. The link cable wasn't just technology, it was philosophy made physical. Trading wasn't just a game mechanic, it was a social ritual. Pokémon centers weren't just healing stations, they were spaces of comfort and reliability. Every design choice, whether intentional or forced by hardware limitations, contributed to creating a world that felt real, inviting, worth exploring. The glitches and quirks that players discovered became features in their own right. Secrets shared on playgrounds and internet forums. Pieces of collective knowledge that bound the community together. MissingNo shouldn't have been famous. It was a mistake. Corrupted data that happened to be accessible, but it became legendary because players made it legendary, sharing the story, performing the ritual, delighting in the transgression of accessing something not meant to be accessed. The anime's global reach proved that these creatures and their stories transcended cultural boundaries. Children in different countries, speaking different languages, shared the same excitement, watching Ash and Pikachu's adventures, trading the same cards, playing the same game. Ikue Ōtani's voice, squeaking Pika Pika, was understood everywhere, a universal language of enthusiasm and determination. The technical achievements, invisible when successful, deserve recognition. Programmers and designers solved countless problems to make these games work on hardware never meant to support such ambitious projects. Every compressed sprite, every recycled sound, every clever workaround represented hours of problem solving and iteration. The games we played were minor miracles of efficiency and creativity, and the legendary Pokémon, scattered across regions and hidden in remote locations, gave structure to exploration. They weren't just powerful creatures to catch, they were goals, destinations, challenges that required preparation and persistence. Finding Articuno in the depths of Seafoam Islands, standing before Mewtwo in Cerulean Cave, tracking the roaming beasts across Johto. These moments marked achievements, milestones in journeys that took hundreds of hours. Through all of this, the core message remained constant. Adventure is better shared. Complete your Pokédex together. Trade with friends. Battle to test your skills, but also to learn. Help each other discover secrets and overcome challenges. Pokémon succeeded not because it was a single-player experience, but because it was a multiplayer one. Not in the modern sense of real-time competitive play, but in the sense of a shared cultural experience, a common ground where everyone spoke the language of teams, types, and strategy. So as these facts fade into the background and sleep draws closer, perhaps you'll dream of tall grass rustling, of Nurse Joy's welcoming face, of that moment when a Pokeball wobbles 3 times and clicks shut, confirming a successful capture. Perhaps you'll remember your first starter, your first Elite Four victory, your first shiny encounter. Perhaps you'll simply rest, comfortable in the knowledge that this world exists somewhere, waiting, ready for whenever you want to return. Thank you for joining me through these 150 facts. If you enjoyed this journey through Pokemon history, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment about your favorite Pokemon memory. Until next time, sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with adventures yet to come.